Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I believe Ms. Einbahn raised the Runaway Homeless Youth Trafficking Prevention Act, which I reintroduced with Senator Collins last year, authorizing funding for essential programs and services for runaways and homeless youth and many other important aspects of our conversation. Ms. Einbahn, how do you come in contact with homeless youth? What is it, through the courts that you usually find these youth?
Thank you for the question, Senator. We find young people facing homelessness in all sorts of ways. Some come straight to our door. Some do come to us through the courts. Some come from referrals, from law enforcement before an arrest, from service providers locally, from all over the country sometimes when young people are looking for a path to safety.
So what percentage of those homeless youth do you think you serve, and what would be the universe we should be serving?
Last year at Covenant House, New Jersey, we reached 2,373 young people. We served nearly 1,000 of those individuals with direct services and nearly 500 with actual housing, nights of housing at one of the sites that we maintain. It is a drop in the bucket for just the state of New Jersey, where we have a low inventory and high housing cost state. The need for more housing is absolutely essential in our state and across the country. The occurrence of homelessness is much more vast. We participate in an annual point-in-time count in the state of New Jersey in January. The numbers this year were higher than they've ever been, a double-digit increase over the years before. It is an absolute crisis, and we need more services to support.
Could you give me the 2 or 3 largest categories of homeless youth?
Well, one category is survivors of human trafficking, actually. And so at Covenant House, New Jersey, we see 10 to 12% of the young people we serve annually who we've screened and then identified as having survived human trafficking at some point during their lifespan before they've arrived at our doorstep. We serve primarily 18 to 21-year-olds, so many of those were survivors of human trafficking. Other young people have been pushed out of their homes when they turn 18 and have no place else to go. And of course, many young people have former experiences in foster care. They've aged out of foster care. Approximately 40% of the young people we serve have had some experience in foster care.
What percentage do you think deal with sexual identity when they're forced out of their homes?
We collect information regarding sexual orientation, a self-reported number at intake, and that number hovers around 20% in New Jersey.
Make sure I understand the 20% of the total. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Ms. Fafa, I've heard maybe you before, or at least your message before, that part of the problem is that law enforcement ends up pointing to the victim for their activity rather than the perpetrator. Explain that, why we can't get that across to them, that they're clearly pointing in the wrong direction.
So the problem is multifaceted. It's often due to the fact that, the stigma associated with children and young people being involved in the sex trade. Oftentimes, there's a lot of confusion on what constitutes sex trafficking. So one of the case scenarios that I shared about the young man, Jason, we would typically describe that scenario as survival sex because there isn't a third-party exploiter. Oftentimes, people don't recognize that. Law enforcement doesn't recognize that as a form of sex trafficking, even though under the federal law, the adult men who purchase sex with that child in exchange for anything of value, that would constitute child sex trafficking under the law. And so, in those types of situations, that minor might be prosecuted or charged with some type of crime. We also have situations of what we call adultification bias, right? This is a form of intersectional bias that's often applied to girls of color, particularly Black girls. This has been a documented form of intersectional and implicit bias. Georgetown Law Center on Gender Justice and Opportunity published a report back in 2018 called Girlhood Interrupted, that goes into detail about this phenomenon. But oftentimes, what we see is that stereotypes that are attributed to Black women are often projected onto Black girls and other girls of color, whereby they're not seen as child victims, they're not seen as crime victims, and as a result, there have been subsequent studies to show that when they experience not only sexual abuse, but also sexual exploitation and sex trafficking, they are seen as willful agents in that violence. And so they're not seen as traumatized as their other peers. And unfortunately, this leads to much more negative outcomes in the justice system. In fact, the Washington State appellate courts have talked about adultification bias and the impacts of it. So it's a well-documented phenomenon. And so this is something that we do address in many of our trainings. And, it's unfortunate, and it's something that continues to be perpetuated across the country. We've written about it in several of our reports, most recently Criminalized Survivors, today's Abuse to Prison Pipeline, but it continues to be a real problem. And as the country is now talking about accountability and the importance of accountability for sex buyers in particular, we are witnessing these legislative debates in several states where sex buying of minors is still a misdemeanor. So, when you look at the imbalance, it's quite stark.
How many states are?
So California last year, we had quite a tumultuous debate around this. And right now, New York State, we are in the process of carrying a bill right now that would make it a felony to buy sex from 15 to 17-year-olds. It's currently a misdemeanor.
Almost afraid to ask about Illinois.
Illinois actually is pretty strong on its patronizing laws.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Clover.